You're not even qualified for assistant manager, the hiring committee left. 3 days later, the shareholder meeting results. I was elected to the board of directors. Their laughter turned to panic when ... Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where loyalty dies, lies bleed out, and the truth hits like a slap to the face. These aren't just stories, they're confessions soaked in betrayal and regret. Ever spotted a red flag when it was already too late? Say it in the comments. Let's tear into today's tale. My name is Arya Mirikhan. 3 weeks ago, I watched 5 grown adults laugh so hard at my job interview that one of them nearly choked on his coffee, while another wiped tears from his eyes. They thought I was just another desperate applicant begging for scraps at their corporate table. What they didn't know was that I owned that table, the building it sat in, and pretty much their entire future. I had been paying their salaries for 8 years without them ever knowing my face. The operations director position I applied for, I never actually wanted it. I just wanted to see how ugly people become when they think nobody important is watching. Turns out, uglier than I ever imagined when the hiring committee chair looked at my thrift store blazer and said, "We need someone with real business connections, not someone who probably takes the bus here." I knew my little experiment had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. They dismissed my application without even glancing at my qualifications. I walked out hearing their cruel laughter echo down the hallway, and I smiled the whole way to my car because I knew what was coming next. Before I tell you how I brought their entire world crashing down, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments if you've ever been underestimated based of how you looked or where you came from? Because what I'm about to share with you shows exactly why treating people with respect isn't just nice, it's survival. And also subscribe and click the bell icon, because this story gets so much wilder than you think. Let me take you back to the beginning. 8 years ago, I was 26 and desperate, fresh out of business school with a mountain of student debt and a head full of ideas nobody wanted to hear. I had developed this consulting methodology that could streamline supply chain operations and save companies millions. But every door I knocked on slammed shut moment they saw my age in my beat-up Honda in their parking lot. That's when I got creative. Instead of trying to sell myself as Arya Mirik, some nobody from Ohio, I created Meridian Strategic Solutions, not me personally, a whole consulting firm with a professional website, a corporate phone number that went to a call center, and a team of legal representatives who handled all client interactions. I stayed completely behind the scenes, working through intermediaries, using my maiden name Castellanos on all business documents to the outside world. I was just another anonymous analyst buried deep in some corporate structure. My first client was Draxford Industries, the same company that would later humiliate me in that interview room. They were hemorrhaging money on inefficient logistics and their operations were a disaster. I spent 6 months analyzing their systems, developing solutions, and implementing changes that saved them $4 million in the first year alone. They loved my work so much they signed a 5-year contract worth $22 million. Here's the beautiful part. I insisted all communications go through my legal team. I never took meetings. I never showed my face to them. I was just this mysterious consulting genius who delivered incredible results from the shadows. They started calling me the Oracle in their internal emails. Best, I seemed to predict exactly what their business needed before they even knew they needed it. Over the next 8 years, I grew my operation carefully. I hired real consultants, real analysts, real project managers, but I remained the invisible brain behind everything, the strategic mind they never met but desperately needed. I expanded my client base to include 7 other major companies. But Draxford remained my anchor account. My contracts with them grew every year. By year 5, I was handling 60% of their annual revenue flow. They had no idea that the woman they would later mock for taking the bus was the same person keeping their lights on. The funny thing is, I really did take the bus to that interview. Not because I had to, but because I wanted the complete experience of being underestimated. I have 3 cars at home, including a Tesla and a BMW, but I wanted to see how they treated someone who looked like they struggled financially. I bought that blazer at Goodwill specifically for this experiment. I practiced looking nervous and grateful. I even carried my resume in a cheap folder instead of a leather portfolio. The acting paid off better than I expected. When I walked into that conference room, the 5 executives were already smirking before I sat down. The hiring committee chair, this pompous man named Conrad, Maddox looked me up and down like I was something unpleasant. He stepped in. The woman next to him, Morgan Grafton, whispered something to her colleague that made him snicker. Conrad barely glanced at my resume before sliding it across the table. Tell me, Miss Aria, what makes you think you're qualified to oversee operations for a company of our caliber? I gave. Then my rehearsed, nervous answer about being eager to learn and bringing fresh perspectives. They exchanged amused looks like I was performing some kind of entertainment for them. Morgan leaned forward with this condescending smile. Honey, do you understand that this position requires managing relationships with our major consulting partners? We're talking about multi-million-dollar contracts with firms that have decades of experience. No offense, but you look like you're still figuring out how to manage your own finances. The room erupted in laughter, not polite chuckles, but genuine belly laughs like she'd just delivered the punchline of the century. Conrad wiped his eyes and shook his head. Morgan is right. We need someone who can walk into a room and command respect. From our biggest vendors. Someone who speaks their language. I mean, look at you. Do you really think our consulting partners would take you seriously? Our main strategic consultant alone brings in over $40 million annually. You think they're going to respect someone who, he gestured vaguely at my outfit, clearly shops at discount stores? More laughter. One executive actually slapped the table. Here's some free advice, Morgan continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Maybe start with an assistant manager position somewhere smaller. Build up your wardrobe, learn how real business works, then come back in a few years when you've gained some credibility. I nodded meekly and asked if there were any entry-level positions available. The laughter got louder. Entry-level? Conrad could barely speak through his amusement. Sweetheart, we don't hire people can't even afford professional attire for our entry-level positions. We have standards here. Maybe try them all or something. I thanked them for their time and gathered my cheap folder. As I walked toward the door, I heard Morgan whisper loudly enough for me to hear. Poor thing probably spent her grocery money on bus fare to get here. That comment right there, that was the moment I decided they needed to learn a lesson they never forget. I went home that day and started planning. Not revenge. That's too emotional and messy. I planned an education, a very expensive education about the consequences of treating people like garbage. First, I pulled all their internal communications from the past 3 years. As their major consulting partner, I had access to their executive email systems for project coordination. What I found was disturbing, but not surprising. Email after email showing how they treated smaller vendors, entry-level applicants, and anyone they perceived as beneath them. They called potential hires desperate losers and charity cases. They joked about stringing along small suppliers for months without payment just because they could. I started recording everything. Every phone call where they were rude to vendors, every meeting where they mocked applicants, every instance where they used their power to make someone feel small. I had been in their systems for 8 years, so I had access to conference room recordings, call transcripts, everything that had created such a toxic culture that they didn't even try to hide it anymore. But the recordings were just the beginning. I spent 3 months building relationships with their competitors, not as Aria Merrick, but as the mysterious head of Meridian Strategic Solutions. I had lunch meetings with CEOs from 7 different companies, all eager to steal away Draxford's most valuable consulting partner. I negotiated preliminary agreements worth $68 million across multiple firms, all contingent on my availability. Then I started documenting their financial dependency on my business. 62% of their annual revenue came from projects I managed without my contracts. They would have to lay off over 300 employees within 6 months. Their stock price would collapse. Their biggest competitors were already circling like sharks, ready to absorb their clients and their best people. I had built myself into their single point of failure, and they had no idea. The beautiful irony was that while I was planning their downfall, they kept praising my work in board meetings. I watched recordings of Conrad himself telling shareholders that their partnership with Meridian Strategic Solutions was the smartest business decision this company ever made. He called my consulting methodology revolutionary and the future of operational efficiency. Morgan, the same woman who mocked my thrift store blazer, presented my quarterly results to investors and took credit for identifying and securing 6 exceptional strategic partners. She literally said, "Our ability to maintain relationships with industry-leading consultants." Like, Meridian demonstrates our commitment to excellence. They had no idea they were praising the woman they had humiliated just weeks earlier. While they celebrated their success, I was quietly transferring my best people to other companies. I found new positions for my most talented consultants with firms that actually respected their employees. I started shifting smaller contracts away from Draxford and toward companies that treated vendors fairly. I was slowly bleeding them dry, while they remained completely oblivious. The preparation phase took for months of documenting, recording, and positioning myself for what was coming next. I wanted everything perfect because I only had one shot at this. Once I revealed who I really was, there would be no going back. On a Tuesday morning in March, my legal team sent Draxford's board of directors a formal request for an emergency shareholders meeting. The request came from Meridian Strategic Solutions, citing concerns about the company's operational direction and requesting immediate board review of current management practices. They had no choice but to agree. When your biggest revenue source requests a board meeting, you don't say no. I spent that week watching them scramble to prepare. They had no idea what the meeting was about, but they knew it could make or break their company. I saw emails flying back and forth as they tried to figure out what Meridian wanted and how to make sure we remain happy. Conrad sent a company-wide memo about maintaining our highest standards of professionalism for the upcoming meeting with our most valued strategic partner. He reminded everyone that this relationship was critical to our continued success, and that every employee should understand how much this partnership means to our future. Morgan scheduled emergency training sessions in client relations and professional conduct. She literally taught classes on treating our consulting partners with the respect they deserve and understanding the importance of our strategic relationships. The same people who had laughed at me for taking the bus were now panicking about impressing the consulting firm I own. Friday morning arrived. I woke up early and put on my best sweet custom-tailored piece worth more than most people's monthly salary. I drove my BMW to the office building I had been visiting for 8 years, but never as myself. I parked in the executive visitor space and walked through those same doors where I had been humiliated for months earlier. The conference room was packed. Every board member, every senior executive, all the people who made decisions about who deserved respect and who didn't. They were dressed in their finest clothes, armed with presentations and proposals, desperate to maintain their relationship with Meridian Strategic Solutions. I walked in and took a seat at the head of the table. The confusion was immediate and beautiful. Conrad looked around like he was expecting someone else to follow me. Morgan kept checking her phone, probably waiting for the real representatives to arrive. "Excuse me," Conrad said politely, "but this meeting is reserved for our partners from Meridian Strategic Solutions. Are you perhaps an assistant or?" I smiled and opened my briefcase, pulling out a stack of contracts with my signature on every page. "My name is Arya Mirik," I said clearly, "and I am Meridian Strategic Solutions." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Elise's face went completely white. Conrad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The other board members looked back and forth between me and the contracts I had spread across the table, trying to process what they were seeing. "That's impossible," Conrad finally whispered. "Meridian Strategic Solutions is a major consulting firm. You're just applied for a job here. You took the bus." I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Conrad's own voice filled the room. "Poor thing probably spent her grocery money on bus fare to get here." Then Elise's laughter, then more cruel comments from that interview 4 months ago. "You're right, Conrad. I did take the bus that day. I also bought this blazer at Goodwill specifically for our meeting." I gestured to my current outfit. "This suit, however, cost more than you make in 3 months." Funny how appearances can be deceiving. The room was completely silent except for the sound of several people breathing heavily. I could see Morgan frantically trying to calculate something in her head, probably wondering how much money they were about to lose. "For 8 years, I have been your company's most valuable partner. My consulting firm has generated over $140 million in revenue for Draxford Industries. Your personal bonuses, your fancy office renovations, your company cars, all paid for by contracts I managed." I stood up and walked around the table, making eye contact with each person who had ever dismissed someone for looking the wrong way. But here's what really interests me. You all knew how important Meridian Strategic Solutions was to your survival. You praised my work in every board meeting. You called my methods revolutionary. You told investors that our partnership was the foundation of your success. Yet, when I walked into your hiring committee looking like an ordinary person needing a job, you treated me like trash. Conrad tried to speak, but I held up my hand. Let me finish, because what you're about to hear gets much worse. I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room projector. The screen filled with email threads, recorded phone calls, and documented conversations spanning 3 years. This is how you talk about job application. You think nobody important is listening. I played a recording of Alyssa calling candidates pathetic wannabes and bottom feeders. Then Conrad describing small vendors as people we can push around beckos, they need us more than we need them. More recordings. Executive meetings where they joked about making suppliers wait months for payment just to show their power. Conversations about hiring practice sheer, they admitted to rejecting qualified candidates for superficial reasons. A particularly nasty discussion about keeping out the riffraff from their company culture. Each revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Several board members were taking frantic notes. Others looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. You created a culture where treating people badly became entertainment. Where humiliating others was acceptably as long as they couldn't fight back. You forgot that respect isn't something you give evenly to people who can help you. It's something you give to everyone because it's right. I clicked to the next slide showing financial projections. Now, let's talk about consequences. As of next Friday, Meridian Strategic Solutions will be terminating all contracts with Draxford Industries. That represents 62% of your annual revenue effective immediately. The panic was instant and visible. Morgan actually stood up from her chair like she was going to run. Conrad's hands were shaking as he reached for his water glass. But wait, there's more. I clicked again. I've spent the past 4 months building relationships with your competitors. 7 different companionship offered to absorb my contracts at higher rates than you've been paying. They're also very interested in hiring your best employees. Word gets out about Draxford's financial situation. Another click, more devastating slides. I've also compiled all of this evidence about your discriminatory hiring practices and vendor abuse into a comprehensive report. Copies are being delivered today to your other major clients, your biggest suppliers, industry trade publications, and several employment law firms that specialize in workplace discrimination cases. Conrad finally found his voice. Aurea, please, we can fix this. We made a mistake, but we can make it right. Name your price. Whatever you want, double your consulting fees, equity in the company, anything. I looked at him with genuine curiosity. You think this is about money? Then what? What do you want from us? I want you to understand something very simple. When you treat people like they're worthless, sometimes you're actually destroying the very thing that keeps you alive. You spent 8 years depending on my expertise while simultaneously creating a culture that would have rejected me if I needed your help. I closed my laptop and packed up my contracts. The really funny part is that I never actually wanted your operations director job. I have my own company that's more successful than yours ever was. I applied to that position as an experiment. I wanted to see what kind of people you really were when you thought nobody was watching. Morgan looked confused and desperate. Then why? Why destroy you for a job you didn't even want? Because what you did to me, you've done to hundreds of other people. I just happened to be the one person who could do something about it. Every applicant you humiliated, every vendor you mistreated, every employee you made feel small. They all deserved better. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this so you learn that actions have consequences. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. Oh, and Conrad. You were wrong about one thing. I don't shop at discount stores because I have to. I shop there because I remember what it feels like to need every dollar. That blazer I wore to your interview, I donated it back to Goodwill after our meeting, along with a check for $50,000 to help other people who might need professional clothes for job interviews. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click. What happened next was better than anything I could have planned. The story broke 3 days later when business reporters got hold of my discrimination report. The headline read, "Major corporation loses largest client after executives mock job applicant." But the real damage came from the recordings. Audio clips of Conrad and Alyssa's cruel comments went viral on professional networking sites. Other companies started sharing their own stories about Draxford's arrogant treatment of vendors and partners. Their stock price dropped 38% in the first week. Two major clients terminated contracts within days. Citing concerns about Draxford's corporate culture and ethical standards, 3 of their best department heads quit and immediately got hired by competitors at higher salaries. But the most beautiful part was watching how quickly their industry reputation crumbled. Companies that had been intimidated by Draxford's aggressive tactics suddenly realized they didn't have to take it anymore. Suppliers started demanding payment upfront. Potential hires began posting about their negative interview experiences online. Even their own employees started speaking up about the toxic workplace culture. Within 6 weeks, Draxford Industries announced they were restructuring operations and laying off 40% of their workforce. Conrad was fired by the board of directors. Alyssa lasted another month before getting terminated for failure to maintain professional standards. The company that had mocked me for taking the bus was now struggling to keep their own lights on. Meanwhile, my consulting business grew by 300% as other companies competed to work with someone who could deliver results while treating people with dignity. I hired 20 new consultants, including several people who had been mistreated by Draxford over the years. We implemented strict policies about respectful communication and ethical business practices. 6 months later, I got a call from a headhunter representing Draxford's board of directors. They wanted to offer me the CEO position to help turn around the company. The salary offer was ridiculous, more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes. I declined politely and suggested they focus on learning how to treat their employees better before worrying about finding new leadership. The final twist came a year later when Draxford Industries filed for bankruptcy. Their assets were purchased by one of my newer consulting clients, a company that had built their entire culture around respect and ethical treatment of employees. They kept most of the good people who had been trapped in Draxford's toxic environment and let go of the executives who had created the problems. Justice served with a side of poetic irony. But the story doesn't end there, because the real victory wasn't watching Draxford fall apart. The real victory was seeing what grew in its place. I started getting emails from people who had heard about what happened. Job seekers who had been humiliated in interviews at other companies, small business owners who had been treated badly by larger corporations, workers who had been made to feel worthless by arrogant managers. They weren't asking for revenge. They were asking for advice about how to stand up for themselves, how to document unfair treatment, how to find their own power in situations where they felt powerless. That's when I realized this experience had taught me something bigger than just how to take down one toxic company. It taught me that respect isn't just a nice thing to give people. It's actually the foundation of sustainable business success. Companies that treat everyone well, regardless of their apparent status or power, build stronger relationships, attract better talent, and create more loyal customers. I started speaking at business conferences about ethical leadership and respectful workplace cultures. I wrote articles about the hidden costs of arrogance, seeing the competitive advantages of treating people well. My consulting firm became known not just for operational efficiency, but for helping companies build cultures where everyone feels valued. The demand was overwhelming. Apparently, there were a lot of businesses out there who wanted to succeed without crushing other people in the process. 3 years later, I was invited to speak at a major industry conference about ethical business practices. The audience was packed with executives, entrepreneurs, and business leaders from companies across the country. After my presentation, during the question and answer session, a young woman in the back row raised her hand. She was wearing what looked like a thrift store blazer and carrying a worn folder instead of a briefcase. What advice do you have for someone who keeps getting rejected from job interviews because they don't look successful enough yet? The room got quiet. I could see several executives in the front row exchange uncomfortable glances, probably wondering if they had ever been guilty of the same bias. I smiled and gave her the most honest answer I could. Never let anyone convince you that your worth is determined by your appearance or your current circumstances. The most successful people I know are the ones who remember what it feels like to struggle and use that empathy to build better companies. Keep applying, keep interviewing, and keep believing in your own value, but also remember that someday, when you have power, use it to make sure other people don't have to go through what you're experiencing now. After the conference, That young woman approached me with her business plan. She had an incredible idea for sustainable packaging that could revolutionize the shipping industry. She just needed someone to give her a chance. I hired her consulting firm the following week. Her first project saved my clients $2 million and reduced their environmental impact by 40%. Sometimes the people who look like they have the least to offer are actually the ones with the most valuable perspectives. You just have to be wise enough to listen. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Respect isn't a luxury you give to people who can help you. It's a necessity you give to everyone because it's what separates successful leaders from failed bullies. The way you treat people when you think nobody important is watching reveals everything about your character and determines everything about your future. And to anyone out there who has ever been laughed at, dismissed, or made to feel small by people who thought they were better than you, remember that their opinion of you says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. Keep working, keep growing, and someday you might just be in a position to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you because of how you looked or where you came from? How did you handle it? Did you ever get the chance to prove them wrong? Share your story below because I read every single comment and I love hearing about people who refuse to let others define their worth. And if this story inspired you or taught you something new about the power of treating people with respect, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about business success and standing up for what's right. Hit the bell icon too so you never miss a new story because trust me, the universe has a funny way of serving justice to people who forget that everyone deserves dignity. Thanks for listening. And remember, you never know who you're really talking to. So treat everyone like they might be the most important person you'll ever meet because someday they just might be.